Greetings and welcome to part 2 of the new A5 Product HUD tutorial video featuring the new Mesh Fae Ears. If you missed part 1 of this video, you can find it on the YouTube channel wherein I used the PSR panel on the new HUD to get these ears fitted properly and resized for my avatar. Now we're going to jump right into the surface controls. Alright, now the first thing you need to do when you start working with the surface controls is make sure that both the object selector and the surface selector, this used to be class on the old A4 HUDs if you're familiar with that. We're calling it surface now, which hopefully will be a little more friendly to the new users, are set to the right items. Now with a straightforward set of items like the ears, there really is only going to be one choice for object. It's a head item, it's the ears. What would have been called the subpart on the old A4 HUD. So head ears is correct, and we're going to start with the skin on the ears. So we have surface set to the Fae Ears skin. Now by default, the texture FE for Fae Ears, skins human textures are what loads with the HUD when it boots up. As you can see, the ears come preset to texture number 2 on that page. You can see that would be number 1, which is a more goth skin tone. It's tone number 1 on Juno and Jupiter, and they come preset to tone number 2. The rest of the human skin tones are all there for the artisan Juno and Jupiter skins. It would be simple enough to just apply the matching texture. The tone that I'm wearing is actually tone 7. So you can see I could just click tone 7 and I get a pretty straight up match for my skin on the ears. However, there's another way to match your skin, especially if none of the skin tones in the HUD happen to be close to the skin tone that you're wearing. And that would be using the RGB tinting method. Now you could RGB tint from one of these base tones if you had one that was close enough for a good starting match. You'd want to find something that has a similar tone. You don't want to choose something that's too blue for a warm skin tone or that's too red for a cool skin tone. But from there you can just go ahead and basically click into the color picker on the left half side of the HUD, and usually that's going to be somewheres down in this area that you're going to want to start with, where the red blends into the yellow down towards the gray. And obviously that's not dark enough yet, but you can see it's still more or less a skin tone. Another way that you can start out is if you have an RGB value that you think is in the ballpark, you can always use the Say RGB button. Now I happen to know that a particular RGB value is going to be in the neighborhood, so I'm going to go ahead and once I click Say RGB, you can see right there in the info window, it says use channel 333 to set RGB using this particular format. And I'm going to do /333. And then I'm going to put in my red, green, blue values and hit enter. And the HUD will pick that up and update the HUD and update the info window. And that gave me an RGB value of 80, 40, 28. Which is in the neighborhood of where I need to be to match my skin. You can see it actually does a pretty good job of matching the shadow on the neck back there. It's a little bit dark on the face. And now I'm going to move on to the fine-tuning controls, which are these little numbers down here. There are little arrows here, but as long as you're clicking anywhere on the right half of that number, it counts as an increase. Anywhere on the left half counts as a decrease. If you wanted to increase or decrease by a larger amount, you can change the increment that's used with this little white number down at the bottom. Now I think I need to make all of this a little bit lighter, so I'm just going to click up a few times on all 3 of these numbers, and it will slowly make it whiter. Alright, and you can see that's a pretty fair match when you consider that I started with a skin tone that's significantly lighter than my own. One other option, which is going to be probably more useful for people that are coming into this with an RGB value from a skin creator, because more skin creators are including RGB values to help match sculpted and meshed objects to their skin tones, is to load the universal skin tones texture group. And to do that, you're going to use the right arrow here to browse over to it, and you'll see where it says Texture FE Skins Universal Tintable. Click to load. Just click anywhere in this text and it'll load up that group. Now these textures are just grayscale. You usually want to start with the lightest one. So we're going to click to apply that. And I'm going to go ahead and click the white preset here to clear out the RGB tint so you can see the base tone. Now once again we're going to use the Say RGB button, and I'm going to do /333, and then I'm going to plug in the RGB value that I have from the skin creator, and it'll automatically set that. And you can see that it's pretty close, maybe a little bit light. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to try one of the other presets here and see if just darkening it up and increasing the shadow values helps out. And that's not too bad. Both of those are pretty close. So I'd say probably somewhere there with either 2 or 3, and that RGB value is a fair match. From there you could go back to the fine-tuning controls if you wanted and tweak it to get it even a little bit closer. I think probably if you lightened everything up here a little bit, it would match with the face a little bit better. I think that's a little bit better match with the face. You could probably do a little tweaking to make it match even better, but you get the idea. I won't lie, the art of matching skin tones is just that. It's an art. It's not an exact science. And what lighting you have going on is going to be an effect on that too. So make sure that you check out your match with your face light on if that's what you usually do, in whatever your favorite lighting scheme is, if you tend to use one of the wind light settings. It's also a good idea to take off face lights and set the thing to midday so that you can get a cleaner look of how it matches up, so that you know at least you're not looking like some kind of mismatched noob to other people as well. Something else that's worth mentioning here, once you have an RGB value that you want to save, you can use these memory slots down at the bottom to store it. So we could just pick a memory slot here and click the down arrow, and you'll see that the memory slot underneath it has been updated. This way, if you put on a new set of ears or whatever, or if you changed the skin tone to match your drow skin and then went back to your human skin and didn't want to go through the battle of matching it all up again, you could just hit that memory slot and it would project that RGB tint onto your ears. Now, since I have a skin that matches in here, I'm going to flip back to the human skins, and I'm going to go ahead and reapply Jupiter Tone 7 and leave that there for the ears. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next surface. To change surfaces that you're working with, you just come up here and click the silver arrows, and I'm going to change to gems because that's next. And you'll notice something here that's very different from the old A4 HUDs. They automatically loaded the first gems texture group when I chose the gem surface class. Now this feature was added mostly to make things easier for new customers. However, with more and more surfaces now using baked textures that don't play well on the other surfaces, I think it'll probably help a lot of people avoid doing things like, you know, pasting your ear skin texture onto your gems and that kind of thing. Something else that I'm going to point out here is that there are multiple texture groups for each one of the surfaces that are in this HUD. You'll see that this is FE Gems Smooth 1. We're going to skip over to FE Gems Smooth 2 and click to load that, and you'll see that these are much more bright colors. FE Gems 1 is actually the metal colors. If you wanted to color the gem like it was metal instead, you could do that using that group. I'm going to go ahead and pan the camera around here a little bit so that you can get a better look at where the gem actually is. And I'm going to go ahead and color that orange. I've been using orange on my gems lately, so I'm going to go that route. And then I'm going to show you how to use another feature that's down here on the bottom right hand corner of the HUD. You'll be used to this if you've used the A4 HUD. I just moved the controls and hopefully made them a little simpler. And these are the other surface settings like bright, shine, alpha, or transparency, and glow. And there's even a texture button down here. This texture button provides a quick way to paste either a blank texture And that's just a plain white base texture that might be useful for some things, or actually an invisible texture. However, there's another way to make things invisible, and I'm going to show you how to do that when I move on to the plugs. For now, I'm going to go ahead and put the orange gem texture back on here. I am, however, going to turn the glow on, and the white box will turn it on, the X box will turn it off, and then the arrows will adjust it either up or down. It also changes a little indicator light on the HUD here to give you some idea how bright the glow is out of 100%. The indicator light only shows when you have the glow on, but it can give you some kind of an idea what will be applied when you turn it on another surface. You're definitely better off checking it as you go. Now that matches the other gems that I've got going on my jewelry, on my horns and everything pretty well. So I'm going to leave that be for the gems now. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next surface, which is piercings 1. And again, you'll see we auto load the first piercings texture group, and that is the metals, and that's the one that I want to use. Now there are actually a few more in this group, and if you want to page through a group that you already have loaded, either one of these large silver arrows on either side will do that. And there's the other two that are in here. There's kind of a bronze or a brass and then a copper. What I'm going to use though is I'm going to go ahead and use the let's see, I'm going to drop the gunmetal on there for piercing group 1, and the piercings are broken into separate pieces. You'll kind of see as I color them here how they're separated. It's just to give you an option for mixing things up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and change to piercings 2. Now you'll notice it did not load a new texture group, because in this case the default group for all of the piercings is piercings 1, and that's the texture group that I have loaded. Let's see, let's go ahead and mix things up a little bit and apply this brass. Okay, now I'm going to move on to piercings 3, and to show you one of the potential drawbacks to the auto load feature, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to load a different piercings group. And again, notice I was trying to change piercings 3, and if I go to texture FE piercings 2, which has bright colors in it that I might want to use for something, and load that, it loads that group, but it also changed the surface back to piercings 1. Obviously that's not very helpful, because if I switch this back to piercings 3 again, it auto loads the default texture group. So in this case I want to at least be able to turn off the texture group auto load, and the arrow that points from the texture group up to the surface is what does that auto load. Now I can do piercings 2 group and it won't change the surface again. And then I can go ahead and apply that to group 3 if I like, or to piercings 3, without it causing a ruckus. There will be times that you'll want to turn it off the other way too, so that changing the surface doesn't load a group. Like if I decided that I wanted to go ahead on to piercings 4 and not load the default group, I'd want to go ahead and turn it off that way too, and go on to piercings 4, and then apply whatever texture it might be that I want to put on there. Now you can see here right now the way they're colored, where the piercings groups are sectioned off. We have the rings are all part of piercings 1, and then piercings 2 are the bands, this kind of 8-pointed star that's underneath the gem, this small starred thing here. Oh no, I'm sorry, the bands and the small gauge here that this ring is in are all part of piercings 2. And then piercings 3 are the balls on the end of the rings, and then piercings 4 were these little starred posts. And obviously you can color those however you might like. I actually prefer to use some of the same textures to keep things a little bit more uniform. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn the auto load feature back on so that we can see how that goes as things progress. And I'm going to move on to, let's see, we've done piercings 4, we're going to move on to the tunnel. Now the tunnel is this area around the gauge or plug. Now there are actually 2 different sets of texture groups for the tunnel. One is called open and one is called plugged. You can see the one that loads here by default, FE Tunnels Plugged 1. That has got a shadow that plays well with the plugs that are in the ear. If you decide you want to wear the ears open with the plugs hidden, there's another group, and I'll get into that in just a minute. For now, let's go ahead and load up one of these textures. Again, I have a tendency to want to match things, so I'm going to choose one of these two textures I already used to pierce the ears. And then we're going to move on to the next group, which is the plug group. Now it would be simple enough here to just drop any texture in, say that one, and call it a day, and we'll be done. However, if you want to hide your plugs, you remember earlier I said that you could come down here and paint an invisible texture on there. That does actually work. However, if you wanted to show it again later, you'd have to reload the plug group and apply your texture again. And if you're not sure exactly which group it was in or whatever, that could be a bigger hassle than is necessary. Instead, what I recommend is leave a regular texture applied, and here on the alpha, use the X there instead. And what that does, instead of applying an invisible texture, is it just sets the transparency to 100%. Now, with the tunnel open, you can see that shadow that I was talking about. Now, that may not be the kind of effect that you want to go with, so we're going to go back to tunnel here. And like I said, you see this one says plugged. If you use the left silver arrow to go back to the open tunnels, you can see that there are actually also 4 groups that match up the same way, and that are for the open tunnels. I'm going to go ahead and load one of those. And again, I'm going to go ahead and choose a texture that matches everything else I've got going on and plug that in there. And once SL decides to res it in for me, you can see that this doesn't have the shadow in it. Instead, what it's actually got is the baked reflections in it, with the tunnel reflecting on itself, essentially. But that gives you the open look. Now, the open tunnel textures actually work fairly well with the plugs as well. So if we go back to the plugs here, let's see, I might want to go ahead and load something different. So let's get past all the plain colored ones. Maybe load, let's see, one of the figures. I'm rather fond of this one with an angel and a demon in it together. Let me find that. I believe it's here on page 3. Here we go. And then you'll remember I made it invisible with the setting the alpha with the X. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the white box on the alpha down here, and there's our plug. And as I said, it works well enough. The open plug textures, the open tunnel textures rather, work okay with the plugs. If we go back and apply the plugged tunnel texture as it reses in, you may or may not be able to see that there's actually a little bit more shadow and reflection that's a little bit different to go along with that. But it's not a big deal. You can go with whichever one makes you happy, of course. I guess if you go with the open tunnel, then you can flip back and forth between plugged and open whenever you want to. And I'm going to go ahead and click surface here one more time, past plugs, and you're going to see skull. Now, this surface is not used on the plugged ears. The P0 ears have got a skull piercing down in the lobe instead of the gauged plugs. Since the same HUD is used for all 4 ears that come in the package, you've got this one texture surface, one surface and a couple of texture groups that aren't any useful to you if you're wearing the gauged ears. Likewise, the tunnel and the plug textures don't do any good if you're wearing the the P0, the non-stretched ears. But I thought it was easier to keep it all in one HUD rather than trying to break it out by ear with the different HUDs. So I hope you'll bear with me if occasionally you see a texture group and or a surface that isn't used in the particular version of the attachment that you might be wearing right now. Okay, we've gone over everything that I intended to go over in this video. I think it's probably run on a little bit longer than I meant it to. So I'm going to go ahead and push the little odds and ends that I also want to cover into a third video in this series. And I'll be getting that one ready here shortly to get posted onto YouTube. For now, I hope this answered your questions about the Surface panel on the new A5 HUDs. If you've got any questions, please feel free to IM me, that's Gallagher Darkstone, or ask in either the Sinful Needs or Sinful Needs Updates group. I'll talk to you again soon. Stay sinful.